Hi, this is Miss Bierman, and I am going to show you how to do a wet-on-wet watercolor technique. So I've got some watercolors here, a few different types. This is a Crayola mixing set, and this is a Reeves set that has some other additional colors. So depending on which watercolors you use, you do have to prepare them by turning the pigment from something dry into something wet so that you can actually paint with it. So what I do is I take a medium to large size brush and I dip it in my water can and I drop water into the paint like this. So I'm adding water and then I'm gently going to mix that up. And so what I'm doing is I'm activating the paint and making it so I can actually use it. So before I start this wet on wet style demonstration, I'm going to mix a few of these paints that I want to use with some water. And I am cleaning my brush between the colors. Very important. But you can see now how I have liquid as opposed to dry pigment. And I'm going to add some here to this yellow. So the watercolors get kind of dirty. One way you can actually clean them off is if you do get them wet like this, you can then sort of blot them, try and clean them off. Like that's supposed to be white and that's supposed to be white. But since we are sharing our supplies amongst hundreds of people, sometimes they get a little mixed up. But if you do get it wet, you can try and wipe off some of that extra color. In this situation, I'm not particularly worried about it not being a perfect yellow. But I do want to add enough water so that it will be runny, but but also colorful. If you add too much water, it just sort of looks diluted. So there's some yellow. I've got this green and this one. I'm going to also prepare a red. I'll go with this one since it's already a little bit damp. So I'm just adding clean water to these colors that I'm going to use. And so those are ready. And as I clean my brush, it's really important that when you use your water can, looks really big here, but don't tap like this. When you tap, what happens is water flies all over the place. So you just want to rub it gently on the bottom. You can squeeze the extra water out, or you can take a paper towel and you can blot it so that it's clean and fairly dry. Because we're using watercolor paint, it's not as crucial that it's totally dry. So here's my drawing, Ridiculous Rose. She's still eating with her hand here. She's grabbing a banana. So to do a wet on wet technique, first you're going to saturate your paper with water. So I'm going to take a bigger brush and I'm going to dip it in the water and I'm going to just put water all over this. The water will dry quickly and the paper will also curl up. You'll see that happening too. So I've just sort of put this wet water all over the entire thing. And then I'm going to start dripping in some colors. So I think I'll start with my yellow. And you do want it to be, I'm going to get a little more water in that yellow. And as I put the color in, you see what will happen is it's going to bleed. The wet on wet technique causes the color to run. And so even though sometimes we're always trying to stay in the lines, but sometimes we're not. And in this case, I'd say try to kind of not worry about the lines so much, just be thinking about the color. If I then go in on my yellow with a little bit of a reddish color, I can get maybe like a peach. So I have just a tiny bit of red on here that I'm sort of blending in with my yellow. And you can see now I'm getting a sort of a peach color for her skin. Ooh, that's real dark. So if you get a little crazy, like I just did, you take your paper towel, use a white one, and you just blot it. And what will happen is it'll pick up a lot of that pigment. And this actually can be a really fun way to paint, to put paint on and then take paint off. Don't scrub it. You only want to blot, because if you scrub it, you're going to tear the paper up. Okay, so you can keep adding water. I'm going to add a little more water here before I move on to this part. And I'm going to use a little bit of these reds and just sort of tap them in here. And then maybe, let's see, a little bit of this orange and sort of tap it in here so that it's going to start mixing together. Sometimes you get like a really cool tie-dye effect. I've got these little leaves that I'm adding a little bit of green to, and then I'm going to come back in with the yellow, I think, and just add a little more. And you can see how it's all sort of running and blending together. But you have to be careful, because if you overdo it, what will happen is you'll end up with some mud. We call it mud, because it's just too many colors mixed up together. So I'm adding a little more yellow here on the arm and the hand. And then I think I might try blotting a little bit. And you can also just blot some of it up like that. Like just take little bits of it up. Right, and now I'm going to try and add some stuff in the background. I've got a little bit of kind of a bluish purple here that I'm going to start adding in. Oh yeah, I like that color. Notice I'm not going up too far though. So like for the background, I'm sort of staying out here and not getting the blue into there, because what will happen is then the blue will bleed over into that area, which I don't really want at this point. But you can see as soon as I put paint down on the wet, it just starts spreading. And like, it can be fun. It can also be really frustrating. So it's just a matter of practicing, and this little illustration that you're doing is a practice illustration, and it's just a way for us to learn how to use different types of media, so when we do our final illustration, you have a lot of choices and a lot of techniques that you can try. So I've filled that all in. I might come back in and blot a little bit more. I'm going to blot the whole thing, just see what happens. You don't have to do that, but you can see. Oh, that's kind of cool. I actually, now I have the pattern of the paper towel on there, which I think is pretty neat. So I'm happy with that. If I want to add just a little bit of color without it bleeding too much, I need to wait for this to dry. This should be pretty dry here. It's not too bad. So I'm going to go ahead and paint her sleeve in here. And you can see this isn't spreading because this little part here is pretty dry. So you can do a variety where you have some that are kind of blending and bleeding into each other, and then other areas where you have a little bit more clarity, like you see there. I might add a little more color onto the onto her rose. When you're finished with your artwork, you are going to put your brushes into this water can that you have. This is going to go on a table to dry. So I'm going to get that out of the way. Your paints, if they're really runny, you can take your paper towel and just blot them carefully so they're not running all over the place. Put the lid on. This one I'm going to blot it just a little bit. All that paint soup that I made, it can run if I close it and go like this. So just blotting that up a little bit. Then make sure that you use a rag and you wash your table off. And that's about it. Thank you.